Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the MakeMed Podcast. I'm your host, Daksh Tyagi, and joining me today is the other co-host, Flynn Scriven. Flynn, mate, how are we?
Good. How are you, Daksh?
I'm going well. I'm really excited to be doing this. Something we've been planning
100%.
for a while. So, yeah, it's exciting for it to be finally coming into fruition. Do we want to quickly just talk about what we're looking to do with this podcast?
Yeah, sure. So, me and Daksh, we just got into medicine, and we just want to give people who are also going down this pathway a bit of a rundown of like the process of getting into medicine, what to do when you want to get into medicine, some ways to get work experience, and also bring on a lot of people who have gone through this pathway. And I think by doing that, we can really provide a good information for you guys, so then this process is easier.
100%. And just to add on to that, I think during the gap year that Flynn and I took, which we'll go into a little bit later, we definitely had a lot of questions which were left unanswered. And we definitely decided that we wanted to gain that knowledge, and we wanted to be able to spread it to all of you guys who are applying in the future. So we're very excited to be here sharing this all with you.
Yeah, 100%. Should be good.
Awesome.
Be good. Okay, so now we'll go into
as.
some information about each of us first, so you guys can get a bit of a rundown of who we are, what we've been through. So, Dax, would you like to go first?
Oh, for sure. All right. Yeah. All right. So, so I graduated year 12 in the year 2020. And in that year, I got an ATAR of 99.2, which is pretty much a percentile rank. Yeah. And in that year, I sat the UCAT, and it was a 2890. And we'll get into more what that score means later. But in that year, in that application year, that score was an 88th percentile. And unfortunately, the combination of my ATAR and the UCAT, even after applying to every single medical school in Australia, did not get me an interview that year. But I was determined. I was passionate, and so I decided to take a gap year, kind of keeping in mind that I would have another shot at resitting the UCAT while keeping my ATAR safe and sound, ready to use. And luckily, the second time around, I did the UCAT. I did a decent amount better. I got 3,210, which opened up a few options for me. Thanks. It opened up a few options for me. And after going through that application process, I ended up getting into University of Newcastle, and that's where I'll be attending.
That's sick, yeah. So a bit about me now. So I graduated 2020, from a rural school. So if you guys aren't aware, I went through the rural pathway, and we'll definitely go into that in another podcast another episode. I graduated with an ATAR of 97.55, and then I didn't actually apply to medicine that year for a combination of factors. I didn't actually know about undergraduate medicine, which is kind of embarrassing. But I was definitely focused on the biomedical science route into postgraduate medicine. So that led me on to going on a gap year where I met the handsome man known as Daksh Tyagi. During that year, I sat the UCAT, did interview prep, and fortunately enough for my UCAT, I got 86 percentile, which as a non-rural candidate, it wouldn't be competitive, but luckily enough, I went to a rural school, I grew up in a rural area, so it was competitive enough to get interviews at all the medical schools I applied to, and I ended up getting 3 offers into medicine, one at Flinders, one at Monash, and one at UNSW in Kensington. And overall, after making that decision, after looking at weighing up the pros and cons of each university, which we'll definitely go through in another episode of which university is the best, which university to steer clear of, and all that stuff. But after weighing up the pros and cons of each, I definitely chose Monash, and I'll be going there actually, I think in 2 weeks or so, which is definitely exciting, even though I have no accommodation. But it should be good. So yeah, that's a bit about me. I think just another thing with my ATAR adjustments, I did get 97.55, but with a lot of other things like rural status and also like Centrelink financial, it boosted it up to 99 point something, which definitely helped in the process of getting into medicine.
Yeah, that sounds good. I just have a couple of questions just listening in.
Yeah, no worries.
So I think you mentioned that you weren't kind of aware of the undergraduate pathway when you were completing year 12. So when exactly did you become aware of that pathway, and what kind of made you want to choose that rather than going down your initial route of like the postgrad med through biomed?
Yeah. Okay, so when I finished year 12 and I got my biomedical science offer, I was looking into biomedical science and I was like, do I really want to be doing this? First, I then looked, okay, I'll be having to sit the GAMSAT. So I opened up actually some ASO GAMSAT material. And I think by looking at that, it kind of deterred me from postgraduate medicine entirely. No. So after that, I looked into other options. There was the non-standard route, which we'll go into in another episode, which is just like university applicant go into medicine through university, but without seeing the GAMSAT. But then I talked to some non-rural kid who actually reached out to me, and he told me about the rural pathway into undergraduate medicine. And as Daksh and I know now, undergraduate medicine is just a direct entry into medicine without sitting the GAMSAT, without doing an undergraduate degree. And you just sit like the UCAT and get an ATAR, and it has to be competitive to some degree. And I'm very happy that I listened to these people, because the GAMSAT would have been a very tough time to go through 100%. Yeah.
No, that I 100% agree. Having looked at a GAMSAT practice paper, it definitely made me want to take a gap year. I did not want to risk the chance of sitting that. Jesus, yeah. We just talked briefly about what undergraduate medicine entails and, you know, how we go through that. So did we want to quickly talk about the other pathways like non-standard and postgrad? Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay.
So I'll
you go, Chief.
Oh jeez.
The non-standard?
Yeah, I'll go non-standard. You can take postgrad. Easy.
Cool.
All right. So non-standard entry is pretty much, it's similar to undergraduate entry in terms of a lot of the universities that offer it. The universities that offer it are a subset of the universities that offer general undergraduate kind of entry. Most of them are in New South Wales, but there's also options in Queensland like JCU, and there's some that like you can apply to after you finish your degree like Curtin, and we'll go into those pathways in more detail later. But point is, there's those universities, and oftentimes you take this pathway when your ATAR wasn't sufficient to kind of be competitive for a medicine offer. So you enter a degree in university and you can use your GPA in conjunction with a UCAT score to apply to these universities. And through there, it's a similar pathway in terms of getting an interview offer, sitting an interview, and then finally achieving a place. So that's a non-standard entry, and it's a great alternative and a plan B, which we'll also go into later.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I'll give you a rundown of actually just the undergraduate path into medicine. So if you guys aren't aware of the undergraduate pathway, so this is based on your year 12 results in terms of your ATAR. For each state, obviously you'd get an ATAR, and you also have the UCAT, which is like this exam that you have to sit midway through year 12, and it tests a variety of things that we'll definitely go into. It's called the University Clinical Aptitude Test. And you have to score quite highly on that to be competitive. And through undergraduate pathway, it opens you up to a variety of pathways. And I've actually done a video about this on my YouTube channel called Sweaty Scriven, if you guys want to check it out. But there's 24, a bit of a plug there, a bit cheeky, but 24 course preferences overall in Australia. And this is a really good, this is compared to postgraduate, which Daksh will give you a rundown next. The postgraduate kind of minimizes your opportunities in terms of the number of universities you can apply to. In terms of also undergraduate, some people, as like myself and Daksh, or Daksh because I didn't apply to medicine, they find that in year 12 they may want to take a gap year to apply again, and that's called the gap year route. With taking a gap year, there are some unis that you can't apply to. If you were a year 12 applicant, you could, such as when you take a gap year, you can't apply to UQ or CQU medicine. So those are around 4 preferences, because you have the bonded and the normal pathway, and those you won't be able to apply to anymore. But it's still taking a gap year, in my opinion, and probably Daksh could agree. You definitely keep a lot more options open than postgraduate medicine. So overall, that would be the undergraduate pathway in terms of just your ATAR, your UCAT, and then you can also take a gap year if you weren't competitive enough in year 12, or like myself, don't want to sit the GAMSAT.
Yeah, and just to add on to that gap year point, I think it's also really important to mention that gap years aren't only just for like getting into medicine. I think it's really important, you know, after for a lot of people what have been 13 years of continuous schooling, or like at least 2 years of hectic, like, you know, competitive schooling, to take a bit of a break, you know, put your feet up a little, if possible travel. Obviously that wasn't an option with COVID and whatnot, but if possible travel, do some work, relax, you know, take care of your mental, physical health, and try and grow as a person. And those are all additional benefits to that gap year route. So I'll quickly touch on the postgrad route as well. So postgraduate route is pretty much just after you finish your degree. So for most people, that would be just a bachelor's program, between 2 and 4 years in most cases. And you use your GPA throughout that program, in addition to a test called the GAMSAT. Now, off the top of my mind, I couldn't even tell you what that stands for, and I don't think any of our viewers want to know what the GAMSATs are all about. I think if you look at a practice paper, Jesus, I have genuine respect for anyone who's gone through that pathway and has persevered to success.
If you're in year 12 and you feel like giving up on the undergraduate pathway and it gets too hard, have a look at the GAMSAT practice test, and that will make you want to try harder in the undergraduate pathway. So
100%. I completely agree. Yeah.
What universities can you apply for through the postgraduate?
Yeah, it's a bunch of universities. It's mostly more sandstone ones. So a lot of the ones which the lay person may look at as more prestigious. So we're talking about your UCIDS, we're still talking about Monash, University of Melbourne, we're talking ANU, UQ, Flinders,
Wollongong.
Wollongong. There's a bunch of Macquarie. Like there's a whole myriad of universities which you can apply to, and most of them are more your sandstone prestigious ones. And in fact, that is why certain people go down that route. And you know what? All the best to them. All the best.
Yeah, exactly.
For them pursuing that.
100%. Now that we've talked about like the pathways of getting into medicine, so you had the non-standard undergraduate and graduate. Now we should talk about how it felt actually to get in, because I know that all our viewers and all our listeners, I hope there's a lot of them, but they're gonna want to get into medicine, obviously, and it's definitely a good feeling once you get in. I think that's something just to motivate you guys a bit. So Daksh, how do you feel when you got your J&P offer?
Yeah, look, I think there needs to be a little bit of subtext to this. I'll give some context. I'll talk you through the emotions. I'll talk you through everything. All right.
Nice.
So the first time I applied, because my scores were quite like borderline, you know, I was quietly hopeful. I wasn't very hopeful, but I was quietly hopeful I would be able to get in and somewhere for med, right? So I think the pain of getting rejected that year was so bad in the sense that I still had hope, and it's the hope that kills you. You know, it's a classic saying. It's always the hope that kills you.
It's rough.
So that happened then, and then, you know, in the gap year, to be able to pick myself up and give it another good shot and finally actually succeed. I think that in itself, like going through the gap year and seeing myself doing well mentally, physically, and taking care of myself, I think that was already such a great thing. And then offer rounds were coming up. I was quietly confident again after my interview, but as we all know with medicine, there's no guarantees. So I was still extremely nervous. And my university offer round was through a tertiary admission center known as UAC. And UAC is the kind of tertiary admission centre for New South Wales. It's where if you want to apply to any university in New South Wales, you apply through there and you can put in your preferences in order, and they will pretty much be the ones to correspond to you whether you've received an offer or not. So they were meant to release at 7:30 a.m., right? So nice and early in the morning. However, year in, year out, UAC has been notorious for releasing offer rounds early, between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. So the night before they came out, I was up, I stayed up, I got on a call with some people, and it was extremely nerve-wracking, right? Because, you know, it hits 2 a.m. and other people start getting offers, and because it's a rollout, you haven't received yours and you're sitting there.
That's rough.
Yeah. Sometimes it can get awkward when everyone else in the call has got an offer and you're just waiting there.
I'll leave the call 100%.
Exactly. So 4:17 a.m. arrives, and I get an email from UAC. Yeah, that was it. Jeez. And I got an email saying, you've been accepted into the joint medical program at University of Newcastle, which was my first preference location. And it also specified the offer type, which was a Commonwealth supported place. Pretty much what that means is that my seat is like subsidized. It's much cheaper than a full fee paying kind of medical school seat. And also because it's an unbonded program, which we'll go into a little bit later, it means that I don't have any restrictions on me in terms of how many years I have to work rurally. I can really choose to work where I kind of want. So that was extremely exciting. I received that offer, told my parents, I woke them up at 4:17. I'm pretty sure they were still awake because they were just as worried as me. They obviously knew how much it meant to me. And it was an extremely emotional time. Lots of emotions building up over the last 2 years. And they kind of just came out at that point in time. It was a lot of happiness, and seeing not only, my own happiness, but their happiness to me was definitely such a rewarding experience. And I don't think I've ever felt a rush or ever felt something like that. Yeah. And I imagine it'd be the same for you as well. You received your offer relatively soon.
100%. Yeah. But I'll give you a rundown of what it was like. So, especially going on a gap year, being in a rural town, being surrounded by people who weren't keen on going into medicine or weren't that focused on actually going to university, it was definitely quite scary for me to take a whole gap year out of like my university life to pursue medicine. And that first was a hurdle I had to overcome. Plan out my year, plan out what I want to do. Did I want to volunteer? Did I want to work? How much of time did I want to focus towards UCAT? And I definitely planned it out well in that, I definitely got all my volunteering down. I ended up volunteering around 260 hours. Looking back at it, I definitely thought it was definitely a good experience, but I definitely think it could have been minimized. And initially I was doing that volunteering for the sole reason of getting into medicine, which was definitely a bad like motive to volunteer. And I definitely do not recommend the viewers and listeners to do that. But apart from that, I did my UCAT. That was definitely a scary experience. And then leading up to the offer rounds, there was definitely a lot of nerves involved. It was scary. As Daksh said before, there were certain nights where I couldn't get to sleep, when my parents couldn't get to sleep. Like, that's the worst thing, when your parents are worried about you getting in and you haven't told them anything. Like, I'm sitting in my bed at 10 o'clock and mum usually goes to bed at 8 and I see her walking out in the room at 12 in the morning. Then I know, like, she's stressed as well. But then getting close to the date as well, it will go a lot more scarier. Especially I sat my JCU medicine interview, and my JCU offer round is the 13th of January, and that's one day before the Monash and the Victoria offer rounds, like La Trobe, Monash. And that was scary because on the 13th I actually didn't get a JCU medicine offer, and because that was like the first offer round of the entire the offer season, you can see how that could be quite like discouraging. And on that day I was considering all my backups. I was considering, should I do dentistry, should I go into undergraduate biomed? My parents were worried, but fortunately enough, during that next day I woke up. It was I slept in, I think it was like 8:30, and I opened my phone and it was email. I scrolled down, I saw VTAC offer letter, and this means that I have got an offer obviously for one of my VTAC preferences. I knew that my lowest VTAC preference was University of Melbourne Biomed, so it could have been that. But fortunately enough, when I just woke up, I just went out to have brekkie. And you know that state, Daksh, of numbness where you're like trying to adjust to reality when you've slept?
100%.
Yeah. I was in that when I was looking at my phone, and I scroll down and I see it says unbonded medicine Monash, CSP or something like that. And I was over the moon, like, because all this work, as Daksh said, that you've been working towards through your gap year, through every activity, everything you did, like, there wasn't one day where you thought about what it's going to be like when I get this offer,
100%.
Yeah. And so when I got that offer, I ran up to my mum, started screaming, and she started calling her parents. I think she started actually, instead of congratulating me first, she just told like everyone in the neighborhood that I got into medicine, which is strange, but fair enough. And then after that, I run into my brother's room, shake him. This is like at 8 in the morning, and my brother's sleeping until 10 in the morning, and I just start shaking him. He's woke. He thinks something's happening in the house. But
Getting robbed.
he thinks it was. But it was a good experience, and definitely like a lot of relief. And it definitely over the next couple days, you definitely. It's probably the most happy you'll be, but it kind of... Did you find, Daksh, that... Oh, your offer came out 3 days ago, didn't it?
Yeah, it was relatively recent, yeah.
Yeah, so mine came out like 16 days, and it kind of like subsides like that happiness and relief. But maybe that's because I came through the rural pathway where it is not as competitive as non-rural, where I find that Daksh would have had it much harder than me in terms of Daksh sat 2 interviews, and because of my rural status, I was able to sit like I think 6 interviews, and because of that, you can see how I was in a position where I had a like on paper a better chance of getting in just because of how many interviews I had. So you can see how for Daksh that would have been a lot more stressful, but still it's definitely a big sense of relief, and you'll find it, viewers and listeners, if you put in that hard work, which I'm sure you guys will if you're listening to this, and if you're listening to this this early in the year as well, where UCAT's approaching. I definitely think that you guys have a really good chance of getting in to medicine, and you guys are going to smash the UCAT, and we'll put out some more videos for that and also interviews, and so you guys can definitely have that same sense of relief as me and Daksh did.
100%. I definitely think the listeners who are listening to this this early in the year, they are 100%. Absolutely guns blazing for the UCAT. This, and just to touch on the point which you mentioned, right, like where like it kind of subsides, I think I 100% agree, and I think that's kind of been something that I know for a fact that at least I've felt throughout this year. Like I remember before my UCAT, right, it was probably 4 or 5 months of solid study. Facts. And I was like, if I get a good UCAT score, I'm gonna feel so good, I'm gonna feel this, I'm gonna feel that, like I'm gonna celebrate. And the UCAT score came, you feel happy for maybe 10-15 minutes, you're a little giddy, and then like I started like critiquing it. I'm like, oh my, this section was a little bit lower than it should have been.
See, that's not what I did. I think the day of my UCAT results, like after I finished my UCAT, I think I went to a party that night and just got absolutely smashed. But
it is the way. It is the way.
It is the way, exactly.
100%.
But you definitely,
but even with this med offer, right? It's a similar thing. 100%. It subsides over time, and I think that's maybe something that we should work on as well.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes, and like I'm sure most of our viewers and listeners who are applying to medicine, they're gonna have those kind of like almost like perfectionist. Or like really driven kind of mindsets where you're never satisfied. You're always hungry for the next big thing. Like sitting here now, I'm thinking of like what I'm going to do in uni.
Next goal.
Yeah, what the next goal is. Exactly, right? And it's almost like we haven't enjoyed this goal.
Exactly. We need to make sure, I'm going ahead, and for the viewers and listeners out there, that with your goals, you don't attach your happiness to your goal, or attach like, if I get this result, I will be this X amount of happy, because you'll get to that point, and as like me and Daksh, the feelings will subside, and you'll have this feeling of emptiness, and then you're going to want to fill it with something else. Like for me and Daksh, it's going to be trying to do the best at uni, or going to a society, or doing something like that. But we're going to try to work on that, obviously, and we definitely recommend that you guys work on that, especially at this early stage in year 12. Obviously enjoy, obviously prepare for the future and put yourself in a really good position for your UCAT, your interview, and your ATAR. But definitely enjoy the present. And I think that was something that I wish I applied to during the year. Obviously, it's easy to say once you've got over that hurdle to say, like, I wish I was enjoying the present then. But definitely try to. Like, I definitely recommend getting those support networks, getting your friends and family, going out, having fun with the boys. You got to, like, respect year 12. Have fun with it, Maybe I'm just saying that because I'm rural.
No. I think it's extremely important to have all of that kind of stuff going on. And I think one of my favorite things that you just mentioned is the importance of friends and family. Yeah. And even if you look at like the way we both kind of summarized getting our offers, we both talked about the effect that it had on our families, right? And I think that's such a key point that you don't realize until you've actually gone through it, is that applying to medicine and going through that journey, while it feels like, it's you versus the world and it's a competitive entry and all that kind of stuff, you have people who are in the journey with you, supporting you, behind you every step of the way. And sure, there will be some people who you meet who aren't as supportive, but you just got to focus on the people who are, and kind of take them with you, because they're going to be supporting you when the times get tough, which oftentimes during medical admissions it will. Like Flynn, you just talked about the JCU
Definitely.
offer. And I
rough.
talked about the entire, like, not getting an interview offer in all of my year 12. So
geez.
exactly right. And in those times, it's really important that we can still balance, having good family and friends to take care of, to be taken care of by.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that in combination with the other thing that we just talked about, which is, not attaching kind of a happiness to results, but like the process, is something that is really important,
100%.
something that we could continue to work on, and something that we might ask our special guest who's coming in today. So today, our special guest for our very first inaugural episode is going to be Dr. Ray Boyapati, also known as Dr. Ray B, all over social media. He's co-founded MedEntry. His Instagram caption. Rising TikTok star. Exactly. We're gonna ask him about that.
Definitely, those shower TikTok videos definitely need to be pointed out.
They're getting a little bit spicy.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, getting a little bit spicy for
professionalism's
for the
key in medicine.
100%. We'll ask him about that.
No doubt. No doubt.
In his Instagram caption, he talks about how he is the CEO of Entry to Medicine. He's also a gastroenterologist and a proud father and husband, and we couldn't be more happy to have him on the show. So
especially
we'll just
for
move
the
over
first
to that
episode.
now.
Hey, that's gonna be sick.
Yeah. I had to pull some strings, but we got it done.
Exactly. All right, we'll see you over there. Thanks for listening for the first part. Definitely, you guys are definitely gonna enjoy the second part with Dr. A.
All right. So for our first guest interview of the MakeMed podcast, we have managed to get Dr. Ray B on the podcast. Dr. Ray B, how are you?
I'm really well, thanks, Daksh. Yeah, and thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been so exciting. Whenever we pitched this idea to our friends of, starting this kind of podcast, everyone always said, get Dr. Ray B on in your first episode. And we're very glad to have made that happen. And really looking forward to this interview. I'm sure it'll be very exciting for a lot of our listeners.
Yeah, fantastic, and well done for starting this as well. I mean, it's such an important area that's poorly understood. I'm sure we'll get into it, but well done for having the initiative to get this started, and good luck with it all.
Awesome, thank you so much. So my other guest host, Flynn, unfortunately has had a bit of a family emergency, so he's on a plane right now. But he's been kind enough to record some of the questions, and send them over so we can still run this interview on time. So best wishes to him, and hope everything's going well on his end. So let's just get started. I have Flynn's first question right here. So let me just play that.
Hi, Dr. Ray. Thanks so much for coming onto the podcast. I really appreciate it, and I'm sorry I can't be there. It's just that I'm going with my family down to Sydney to settle my brother into university. But I definitely have a couple questions that I want to ask. And the first is, what uni did you study medicine at? And also, what were the scores back then that you needed to get into medical school? And lastly, I definitely want to understand, what were your overall thoughts on the admissions process back then in general?
Okay, so thanks for the questions. I think the first question was what university I studied medicine in. I studied medicine at Monash University. Back then, the requirements for medicine were similar but different. So we had a different test that we were required to do called the UMAT. It was a sort of similar in terms of non-knowledge based testing, kind of generic skills based testing that they employed, but it's different to the UCAT in a few different ways. So they had that as part of the entry process. They also had, of course, your ATAR, I think it was called Enter at that time, and they also had a interview component too. So I think in many respects, that kind of three-pronged approach has been there for a lot of universities for many years. Some universities, back when I was doing the getting into medicine process, that actually didn't have interviews, or they only used the ATAR for a lot of universities. And more and more universities have now kind of come to this idea that they need to have multiple ways to select people, and that's the best way to select them. And I think the final question was what were the kind of scores that were required, or what was and what was the process like? I mean, it was competitive at the time. I always felt it was super competitive, and every year, I think the people going through the process feel like it's getting more and more competitive, and to a degree, that is the case. And the reason, of course, is that the government sets the number of medical places that are available. And so because of that restricted number and the fact that the population is growing, the medicine as a career is seen as appealing for many different reasons, the sort of number of people that are coming into medicine or wanting to go into medicine is increasing. So that supply and demand equation isn't great. And therefore, it does get more and more competitive. And I think there's kind of another layer to that, in that we've got a sort of a real focus on rural health now. I think that you'll be aware of this, Daksh, and that there's a certain number of places that are available only for rural students, and that has kind of been implemented since I went through, and because of that, it's become certainly more competitive since I went through.
Okay, that's really interesting that you said that it's probably become more competitive. So some of the changes I think you mentioned were bringing these rural seats, and some universities bringing in more like interview kind of criteria to get in. So you obviously have been through that process yourself. You've seen graduates coming in through that process. Do you think the change in graduates has been like in the terms of like the quality of physicians that are coming through? Do you think it's gone up or down, or do you think it's been relatively similar throughout the changes in this entrance criteria?
Oh, I mean, I think that most of the students that I teach now are far more intelligent and capable than I was. That's at the time, and certainly, I think that because the requirements are going up, it's not even intelligence. It's more the kind of commitment, resilience, the determination that you need these days. I did quite well in my high school and also in my UMAT at the time, and so I was actually able to get a scholarship to study medicine at Monash, and subsequently now I work at Monash University. But I don't think I would achieve that now. I think that now the sort of requirements and the number of people who are going for it and the quality of these candidates are sort of increasing. And I've certainly seen a consistency in some ways, but then a change in some ways. So the change, I think, is that people have been required to be more capable, whether it's in terms of their determination, their resilience, their hard work, or in terms of how the actual scores. But I think some of the similarities that has persisted over the course of the last 20 years, and that's the kind of time period that I've been mentoring people coming through this process, there's a lot of similarities too. And I don't know if this kind of we're going to get into this later on, but there's the mentality of the pre-med student, that is the person trying to get into medicine, the perfectionist mentality, which it sort of selects for that. If you need to get really high scores at school, you kind of need to be, to a degree, a bit of a perfectionist, and that actually has issues. There's issues with that mentality in terms of the UCAT, but it also, more importantly, in terms of people's kind of approach to life in general, and how they deal with failure. And I think I focus a lot of my teaching on the fear of failure and the difficulty that people with the mentality of pre-med have with that. And a lot of what I do is actually trying to get people to overcome that fear in order to fail and improve and grow, and not have that fear of failure. So there's some similarities in terms of the mentality, I think, but there's definitely differences in terms of the difficulty of getting into medicine, and therefore the capability of these people.
I think that point that you made at the end is a really, really good point, and we will be getting more in depth with that very, very soon. So looking forward to hearing you elaborate on that. So I've got the next question from Flynn here. Let me just put that up.
The next question to you, Dr. Ray, is: did you find medical school as difficult as you thought it would be, or did you find it more difficult or less difficult? That's definitely an answer that I want to know, because I want to make sure that I'm going into medical school with the right mindset and definitely with an understanding of how difficult it's going to be.
Yeah, it's a great question. I get this question a lot. And I sort of want to preface it by saying that my experience is one experience. And I think it's important to have a wide range of experiences. Look, I went into medical school thinking it was going to be very difficult, thinking that it was going to be a lot of hard work and I was going to have to really knuckle down for, the foreseeable future. I think there was some truth to that in the end for me, and there was some things that were actually quite a lot more straightforward, and the process was a lot easier than I anticipated. So you guys, I think, are going into med school, right? So you've just gotten into med school, and I've got to congratulate you both for getting into med school, which is it's a very exciting time. But I think that I went into it knowing that it was going to be a challenge, and that's good. Like, I mean, I actually encourage and sort of congratulate people who are in year 11 and 10 and 12 who are looking to get into medicine for just even having the kind of gumption to go for something so difficult. It's actually a big leap of faith that people take. They're sort of going into the unknown, thinking that however much research you've done, you don't actually know what you're getting yourself into completely. And also for trying to do something that is so difficult, that is first getting into medical school and then doing it and becoming a doctor. So, that's the first thing that needs to be said. I think that from my experience, I kind of went into it thinking it was going to be difficult. It was challenging in many ways. And that was good. I liked that. I think that was a fantastic thing, but it certainly wasn't as, I'm going to word this correctly, it wasn't as difficult as I thought it was going to be. And that was because I always feel like this kind of hurdles are always lower as you go along in your career once in medicine. So most careers, the bottleneck is at the job stage or progressing in your career. In medicine, that's not the case. That's very different. I mean, the job is there for you once you've got through med school. Actually, the bottleneck, I think, is at this point when you're trying to get into medical school. So obviously, it's a very difficult process. So I think going back to that hurdle analogy, actually, the biggest hurdle is getting in. And then anyone who gets into med school, in my view, is completely capable of doing, of completing the degree, doing it very well, and becoming an excellent doctor. And so I want to sort of encourage and sort of give you guys a bit of faith that, because this imposter syndrome is kind of prevalent where you think, oh, I'm not good enough to do this, I'm not good enough to do this. And I'll tell you, it sort of follows you throughout your career. But if you got into med school, I think you should be confident that you've got the skills, the capability of doing well. The problem with medicine is not the difficulty of the actual concepts. This is not rocket science. It's the volume. I mean, there's some difficult concepts, don't get me wrong, but it's the volume of material. And so you need to be super organized, and you need to, I think, have some sort of structure to your day. You need to have an ability to motivate yourself through quite a large body of work, and then have the ability to also come back from difficult times. Like, you will have periods where you won't get good grades, or you'll do a clinical examination in front of your peers and you'll completely suck at it, and it's kind of embarrassing. And of course, and if those people who have got this kind of fear of failure, that can really ruin their sort of progress through the course. And so we come back to that fear of failure where if you don't have that resilience and that kind of understanding that anytime you do poorly in med school, it's not a reflection of you as a person. It's just a reflection of your knowledge and ability at one point in time. And then you can grow from that. And so I struggled with that myself during med school. But 100%, I thought it was fun, way more fun than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be not as much fun. And I'll tell you why it's fun. It's fun because you are with the people that you are going to be with in the course the whole time. And that's unlike pretty much any other university course. You go into something like arts or law, you'll do a couple of subjects with a few other people, and you'll see them here and there. But in med school, you're doing everything with the same group. Because you've been selected for medicine, and that you'll do your pracs with them, you'll do your lectures with them, you go to your social events with them, it's all very incestuous, it's all very like
Yeah.
there's this, and this is why there's so many people who, end up kind of, having partners from their med school and so forth. So it's lots of fun. You work hard, you enjoy yourself, and I thought it was a fantastic experience. Now looking back, there were some difficult times, but certainly not as hard as I thought it was going to be, and much more fun than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, that sounds so exciting and very relieving for me who was about to enter. I really like the hurdle analogy you brought up. The idea that the first hurdle is kind of like the most extreme and everything from there kind of goes lower and lower. So let's think about like a student maybe in year 11 or 12, just before that first hurdle. Obviously, lots of doubts running through their mind. What piece of advice would you like to give them who are probably contemplating career in either medicine or dentistry?
Yeah. So for the younger students out there who are sort of thinking about this as a career, and the first thing to do is really get a sense about what this career entails. I mean, it's so important to really try to understand what you're trying to get into before you start making all these steps to try to get into it. Because, and I see so many people not doing that enough. I don't know what you did, Dax, and I'd be interested to hear about like kind of your process about it. There's so many ways to do this. I mean, a lot of the kind of traditional ways are work experience and volunteer work and these kind of things. And it's been difficult with the pandemic recently, but there's lots of other ways. I mean, there's reading books, there's talking to doctors, there's talking to medical students, there's listening to podcasts, there's listening to watching shows. There's so many ways to learn a lot about the career, and that's the first thing you need to do. What did you do? Actually, be interested to hear, like, to just learn about the career, because I think it's not done enough early on.
Yeah, I was very fortunate in that I took a gap year. So the year where I did my year 11 and 12, we didn't have as many COVID restrictions. So I was able to complete a few work experiences at local hospitals and get to know doctors. And, once the restrictions started kicking in for COVID, it was a lot more like watching, medical drama shows, which aren't as accurate. I can already see like the inaccuracies, but that and watching a lot of like those videos on like a day in the life of a doctor. And like certain like looking into that, because those I feel offer a really unique insight into a lot of things which you may not actually get to see even in work experience.
Yeah, and more realistic as well. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
There's so many benefits to doing that early. One is that you obviously, learn more about the career that you want to spend, potentially the next 50 years doing. I mean,
Yeah.
and the second thing is that it helps keep that motivation up. I think once you've established this as the career for you, during the difficult process of getting into medicine, you'll encounter a lot of setbacks, and it's really easy to get demotivated by it. And unless you have that strong desire and understanding on what it is that you want to do, and a real sense of like why you want to do it, not just like why other people want to go into medicine, it won't sustain you. And I think so I feel like that's probably the most important message I have for younger students. I mean, after you've done that, you really should, I think, look into the prerequisites, understand the subjects that you should be selecting, because there are some universities who do have prerequisite subjects, and then look at, what kind of other things are required, including, skills in the interview, the UCAT. So I think the most important thing is understand the career, why you want to go into it, so that sustains you. Then kind of learn a bit more about the mechanics about it, and then start preparing.
Absolutely. I think that sounds like a really actionable plan as well, which is really helpful. Now, I'm about to hit you with a very, very broad question. So answer it as you wish. So how do you think you kind of struck the balance between kind of living life and being social and like going to medical school, right? Obviously, that would have very high course requirements and all that kind of stuff. So how do you think you struck the balance?
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. In the first 6 months, I didn't strike it very well.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that I got a scholarship, and I think I was at one point almost threatened with losing my scholarship because I wasn't finding the balance. I wasn't finding the transition easy, and I think a lot of people will find this whether you're in medicine or in any other university course. The big thing to know about the change is that, of course, it's much more self-directed, and that's in university, in general. You'll have got a curriculum, you'll have got a classes and teachers with lots of contact hours. If you think about how many hours you do at school, it's a lot that you're at school. Whereas at university, even for medicine, which is probably the most contact hours of any course, you're going to be at maximum 20 hours a week. That's not a lot, right? And that's a lot of time that you've got. And you can either kind of use that time or not. And I think that if you think about it in terms of how much time you got available, you can really think, well, I've got so much more time to find the right balance, actually. I probably just didn't, I did far more of the social stuff than I should have, and not enough of the medicine, probably because it was such a release to get into medicine. It was just like, I'm in now, and and so I got a bit of the kick up the bum at that time, and then started really working much more sort of efficiently. So what I would suggest to people like you is that you do have the time, firstly, and I think that if you don't make that time for yourself, and in terms of socializing, but also just self-care, then you will find it hard to maintain the energy throughout the career, throughout the course. So I would say yes, I think you have the opportunity to do that. I think the main thing to do is to structure your week, have dedicated time for study, have dedicated time for socializing, and of course, I think the most important thing that I found was finding a few people that had the same kind of work-life balance that I wanted, and then ending up in study groups with them. That really helped a lot for me as well.
Yeah. That sounds fair enough. So would you say that there's no like one size fits all kind of thing there? It's kind of finding people who have a similar balance to you and then kind of grouping in with them?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, there's no one way to skin a cat. And I think that, lots of people that I know will require less social life than I wanted. There'll be a lot more people who want more, and there's no right amount. I think as long as you get the work done, and of course being efficient in your learning is really important. I talk about this when I teach people in pre-med, and also throughout med school and in physicians, is being efficient in your work, and there's lots of ways to do that, but yeah, if you can do that, and then find your own path. Some people are really, I never really found it useful to kind of sit there and read textbooks. I thought that was always, way more inefficient, and I never really understood. I was always finding myself reading the same passage again and again. I needed to apply it, and I needed to understand how it was going to affect real people, even in those early years, which were the preclinical years. And so, again, found people who were sort of similar to them. And that's what you do when you find your friends who are in a similar mindset. And then I tried to, to, instead of just doing the kind of reading, actually do questions and talk to people about problems. And that was the best way for me. And luckily, when I went through the kind of problem-based learning, which is quite well established now in med school, was kind of just starting, not really just starting, but it was just getting introduced a few years prior to that. And luckily, that's kind of how I was taught at Monash University.
Nice. So I think this next question that Flynn has for you is a little bit further down your career. So let's have a quick listen.
My next question is about your specialty. When did you personally know that gastroenterology was for you? And lastly, how long did it take you post-graduation from medical school to get into gastroenterology?
Yeah, it's a really great question. The first thing I want to say is, in a general sense, don't worry that if you don't know what you want to do, don't worry. Some people contact me saying, I'm in year 10 and I don't know what I want to do. I'm panicking. Like, you're in year 10, first get into med school. And then, even, you're in first year med school or third year med school or fifth year med school. Don't worry. My experience was that I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. My mum is a GP, and I always found that really fascinating. The main thing that attracted me to GP during my early years was the connection she made with her patients over a long period of time. So she has patients she's known for 30 years, and that is something that's quite remarkable. I see it. I was actually, working as a secretary in her practice for some time and saw that real connection. And so I felt like that was probably something I wanted. And possibly that's one of the reasons why I sort of discounted surgery as an option early on. You can certainly find connections with people in surgery. There's no doubt about that. It's just more the longer term interactions is usually not there, or not as much, because you have patients where you have a problem and, you know, the surgeon will do something and fix it. And then, you know, if all goes well, you don't necessarily see that patient in a long-term basis. And there's lots of benefits to doing that kind of work as well, of course, professionally and obviously for the patient. But it's yeah, I kind of wanted that. So I think what I did was I started crossing off things that I didn't really want to do. And I think that's what most people do. So I went and did a rotation at med school in psychiatry, for example, and I loved it early on in the first couple of weeks. But as I went through the rotation, I felt like I couldn't do this long term. And same thing for many other different career, specialties. And then as an intern, you just kind of go around and work, and essentially a focus, I think, a bit more on your work as opposed to, you know, where you want to end up. And then you kind of pick a broad area, and that's what I did. I picked medicine as an area, adult medicine, rather than say pediatrics or something like critical care or surgery. And then I rotated through a number of different rotations in adult medicine, including kidney medicine and cancer medicine and cardiology or heart medicine. And so went through all of those areas, and I ended up at doing, you know, probably not because I don't think I actually picked it as an option. I just got put into this gastroenterology, and it was the part of the liver transplant unit at the Austin Hospital. And this was second year out, I think, from med school. And I just loved it. And actually what I loved about it was the medicine. So gastroenterology really involves a lot of different organ systems. So not just your gut or your bowel, but your small bowel, your large bowel, your esophagus, which is your food pipe, your stomach, your pancreas, your liver. There's so many different areas that you deal with, and that was quite good. I quite like that broad scope. And it also dealt with procedures, like you could do gastroscopies and colonoscopies, you could fix bleeding, you could take out polyps. I love that aspect of it. And there was this acute and chronic medicine, so I still had that capability of being able to, you know, manage patients over a long period of time, like I talked about with my mum and her GP practice. So all of that combined, I really liked. But actually, one of the most, I think, underrated things in medicine is actually you just find people that you like in that particular rotation. I saw these gastroenterologists, they had a sense of humor, they had good work-life balance. And maybe it was just, you know, serendipity and the fact that I had that group of people at that particular time. And who knows whether I had a different group of people at another time, I might not have liked it. But I feel like part of it is just organic, and you're just going to, you know, find something that really clicks with you. And I found that at that time, and after that, I sort of moved towards gastroenterology. In terms of how long it took, it's a long process. I mean, a lot of people think about it as, you know, how many years from the start of getting into med school, like you are now, to when you finish as a consultant. But I don't like to think of it as this pipe that you end up going into and then end up out of, you know, 10, 15 years down the track, because that discounts all of the growth and experiences you have during that time. And that is, I think, some of the best parts of my career. If I look back at it, they were some of the most fun. I had some of the best experiences because you're working quite intensely as a junior doctor with other interns and other residents. So I felt like that is important to sort of establish. In terms of how long it took, I think 5 years of med school, an intern year. I think I did 1 year of residency and then took a year off to travel. And that I'd recommend that to people. And then I came back as a medical registrar, probably another 2 years, gastro registrar, 11 fellow year. And I went overseas to Edinburgh. So it's sort of like, I guess it ends up being about 10 to 12 years. That was kind of a quick process, apart from the year I took off. You know, some people can do things and you get into their field quicker, for example, in general practice, especially if you know you want to do that and go into it quickly and get in. Some people will take a few years to get into their specialty, so it'll take longer. And then there'll be other programs that are longer training programs, and so it can be longer as well. So there's no one number, and I want to make the big point that I don't want you to focus on the number. I want you to focus on the sort of process. And you don't want to be someone, Daksh, in 5 years' time doing gastroscopies and colonoscopies. And I tell you what, no, none of your patients want that too. What you want is you want to have had all the experience so that you're comfortable making the decisions, doing the stuff, and your patients want that too. That experience. I mean, in medicine, I think the best comparison in terms of career with medicine is like a carpenter. You go in as an apprentice and you learn through experiences. You'll learn more in the first year of your of going in as an intern than you will in your 5 years of med school. And that's because it's all about experience. And you want to gain that experience over a long period of time, and then you'll be comfortable, and that's what you want.
I think it's very definitely relieving to hear what you said initially about the specialties and like how it's okay to not know exactly what you want to go into. Because I've definitely met people all the way back from like year 10. Like some people are like, oh, I'm going to be a neurosurgeon or I'm going to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. It's like, I'm in year 10. I don't even know what I want to do yet. So it's definitely very relieving to hear you say that having gone through the process, it's a bit of a relief.
No, I tell this to my medical students all the time, Daksh, and I can, just relax. And I think it's almost because there's this arms race to try to, I've got to get into the specialty. It's getting more difficult. So I need to know so I can do research and do this and that. No, you don't. And actually, I think it can be a little bit counterproductive to pigeonhole yourself into a particular specialty before you know about it. My question to people who think they want to become a neurosurgeon when they're in year 10 or even when they're in second or third or fourth year med school, I mean, how do you know? I mean, how much do you know about that career in terms of everything, not just the medicine, but the life balance and all the rest? And often you don't know until you're actually working in it and really working with others. So yeah, don't panic and actually just relax about it, I think.
Absolutely, will do. So this next question is a little bit more of a light question. So recently we've seen that you've made a transition over to TikTok. You're becoming an inspiring TikTok artist. Really entertaining TikToks, by the way. But what do you think it was that kind of prompted you to use things like Instagram Reels and TikTok to kind of reach out to students? What do you think kind of catalyzed that?
Yeah, I mean, I interact with young people all the time over the last 20 years. I mean, and really, I reckon a few years ago, it might have been 5 or 6 years ago, people started telling me, we don't use Facebook and at that time I think they were saying we don't even use Instagram. We use Snapchat and we use TikTok and I think that actually it was MedEntry who kind of who was kind of using those forums like Facebook and mainly the idea was that during these conversations with students in workshops they were telling me, look, all of this information is just not there and we don't see it. And so and they kept saying, look, I'd just, go on TikTok and do something there. And I was like, are you serious? I'm not going on TikTok. I mean, I'm a serious person. I'm not going on TikTok and sort of dancing away. And it I just had the attitude that most people that I encounter my age and would have, which is, how ridiculous. But actually, what I did was what happened was someone actually showed me a TikTok on in one of these workshops, and I was like, actually, there's lots of stuff on here that's pretty informational. So I downloaded it, and I sort of thought, oh, look, it's quite useful to get messages across to my audience, which is basically, young people, because they're not listening to anything I say on Facebook or whatever, and because they're just not on it, their parents are on it, and so so I thought, look, I'll give it a go, and I never actually actioned that until the pandemic, and so. What happened was I just had a bit more time on my hands, actually. You might have thought like I would be much more busy with the pandemic in the hospital. And recent surges as definitely that's been the case. But at that time, everything kind of got shut down a little bit in the hospitals. And so I had a little bit more time, and especially I'm in Melbourne, and it was a lockdown, and I was at home, and so I just went on TikTok, and I sort of had a look around, and I thought, I'll give it a go. And so gave it a go, and it just showed you, I think, that the growth in people who are interested in it and following just showed how much thirst there was for this kind of information. And it's been fun. Like I've actually stopped posting recently just because I've had a lot of other things going on, and my first child has started school, and I've got 3 kids now, and I've got a lot of work at the hospital, which there's been surges recently. So and I'm sure I'll get back to it, but I think the idea is that it was a really good form of communicating and engaging with the people that I really wanted to educate. And so, it's been really fun, actually. Bit kind of time consuming at times, but fun. And I've really enjoyed it. And I've enjoyed actually interacting with people on the platform. It's been really fun. And actually what that's also done is drive a lot of people towards my Instagram messages. And so I get a lot of people asking about various questions of medical entry, and also, just how do I get into this particular course or whatever. And I've found that really helpful, that I've been able to provide that information in that way. And because, as we'll probably get to, there's a dearth of information out there about it.
Absolutely. I know that I definitely also kind of took that opportunity on board, and I've messaged you many, many times, and you've been awesome enough to respond, and I'm very thankful for that. It's definitely, especially when you're very doubtful about the process, it's very difficult to know who to talk to, because as well-intentioned as parents may be, they may not always know the ins and outs of the process. So having someone there to message, it's always very, very handy. So thank you for that. So the next question is a little bit more about MedEntry. So you're one of the co-founders of MedEntry, which is one of the main UCAT and interview prep services in Australia. So Flynn actually had a great question about it. Let me just pull it up.
So for me personally, MedEntry was definitely linked with UCAT and interview prep. For me, going through that process, it was always MedEntry that was standing out there. And I just want to know, what was it originally that made you want to pursue creating the prep company MedEntry?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll look back to when we thought about this whole thing with my sister, and this was when we went through the whole process, and there was just literally no information out there about medical entry pathways. There was kind of preparation, but it was really poor. It wasn't run by doctors, so it didn't give you that perspective of what's happening afterwards. And I thought that, at the time we thought we could do something that really could help with this. There was also a focus, and we've had this focus for 20 years of increasing, widening access. And so especially in terms of what's been important in Australia in particular is widening access to rural communities and Indigenous communities in terms of accessing these kind of courses. And so those were probably the 2 major things that we thought we could help with. Initially, when we started, my sister and I was flying around Australia with money that we just didn't have. We got a massive loan from I don't know why the bank gave it to us, probably because we were medical students, they know we'd pay it back. But we got a big loan, and we just went around and we took a bit of a punt, and we thought, let's do this. And, we're flying around to places and doing classes with 5 or 10 students, and it was kind of not making any money at all, and we were worried about whether the loans were going to be, they were going to tell us to pay it back, and so it took a few years, but eventually I think people understood that we had quality product and service, and that was the UMAT at the time, of course, and then eventually just word of mouth spread, and so that's kind of where it started. In terms of the increasing representation, I mean, one of the things that my sister and I are most proud of is that we've we've offered somewhere between, I think with last count, it's about $1.4 million worth of scholarships, donations and bursaries to rural students, to Indigenous students, and to widening access in the UK and in Ireland. And, that's for us one of the things that we were most proud of looking back over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I personally know many people who have kind of benefited from that bursary. I think there's one which is like where you get recommended by a doctor, or one for being rural. I think there's one for like Victoria and South Australian students who are rural. So I think it's really really good because a lot of the other prep companies definitely don't do that at all. You hear many stories about people who have to kind of choose between getting like the essentials and prepping for their future. And I think it's really really good that med entry is kind of allowed for both. Which is great to see.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's when we look at let's talk about rural health and underrepresented communities. The problem that we have is that people who are in these communities often actually don't have people who they know who have gone through the process, and so it stops right at the start, and it's awful. And so if you can help one person in that community get through into med school and become a doctor, potentially come back, that potentially will help many more people who know that person. And so we're really proud of those relationships we've got with the government agencies in South Australia and Victoria. We're trying to make it a national thing, and that'll be great because that'll just provide free workshops and online resources to everyone in rural Australia, and then also people, as you said, like who are nominated by their teacher. So look, if you can't afford the med entry stuff, go talk to your teacher. I mean, we can provide that kind of help, and we want people to take advantage of these scholarships and bursaries because we want people who come from underrepresented communities and financial disadvantage to really get into medicine because they've had the opportunity blocked for so long.
Absolutely. I think it's a really, really great thing you guys are doing, and hopefully you guys keep going on and onwards to bigger and better things. So I think earlier, right at the beginning of the interview, you talked about how you went to Monash. And I definitely say like going through the application process and networking with other other pre-medical students who are trying to get into med school. Monash is probably the one school that's almost seen as like a holy grail for undergraduate medicine, right? It's like there's like this huge perceived prestige factor, I guess you could say. So my question for you is, how do you view the importance of something like perceived prestige or even actual prestige in a degree like medicine, where not only limited to the actual degree itself, but also looking down the line at things like internships and things like specialties?
Yeah, I've in the last few weeks after all the offers came out, I've received maybe 100 queries like this. I've got offers to this first uni and this particular uni. Which one should I take? I'm really worried that if I go to this uni, which is close to me, I'll sort of hamstring my career for the future because it's not perceived as as good as this one, which is interstate or elsewhere. I work at Monash University, and I can say pretty clearly that it does not matter where you go in medicine in Australia and New Zealand. It just doesn't. In Australia and New Zealand, you will get an excellent education from any of the accredited medical universities. I'm a part of panels and things to select people as interns and going into residency. Not once have I looked at what university they went to. Not once. Now maybe there are other people who do, but I think that would be very unlikely. In my view, what's important is not where you went to uni, but what you did at university. And so sometimes we do look at what scores you got, but it's even then it's not that important because a lot of universities just have pass grade only actually these days. And more importantly is what else have you done? Like, are you a good communicator? Like, that's really important in interviews. Have you done any research or audits or helped out in other ways? What other extracurricular activities do you do? Are you, what can you show us that you're an organized person? These are the kind of things that are pretty important to us. And so, for anyone out there who's worried, I'm going to this particular university, it's not, Monash or, UNSW or whatever. forget it. Go to the university. Well, number one, just get into medicine anywhere if you can, if that's what you want to do. And number two, go to the one that, there's a lot of factors you can consider. Where's close to you and your family? That's often an important consideration, because obviously support is important. How many years is the course? That's another reason why Monash is probably perceived highly, because it's a sort of shorter degree. It's straight from high school, so it's appealing in that way. What's the quality of education? No, because as I said, all the universities in Australia who've got accreditation are really well, got excellent teaching, and most of the teaching that you get is not actually at the university anyway. It's at the hospitals that the universities are associated with. I would say that where you go to university probably matters about where you're going to end up as an intern. I think that's probably likely. And the reason is you can, do internships interstate, I believe, but it's much more likely you go in later years. And the reason is you make connections. You know people at the hospital. You may have done research with certain people at the hospital. They are more likely to take you on if you've shown initiative and you've been a star person there. And so that's certainly the case. And moving into state can be a challenge in many ways. But one of the things I always recommend, because it's becoming so competitive, is apply everywhere. And I'm sure you did that, Daksh. I mean, just apply everywhere you can, because it's so hard to get in. But don't worry about prestige. It may be the case that this is important in, say, the US. I think that there's some evidence that in some situations that's the case. It's not in Australia. It's not.
Awesome. No, that's great to hear. Yeah, because you definitely hear people talking about that a lot. So I think what you said, they would make a great clip as well, just to kind of publish everywhere. Okay, final question.
I might get sacked from Monash University, but anyway.
No. Oh no. Okay, maybe we'll keep it on the down low. We'll keep it to only a few. Okay, final question. So Flynn and I are obviously about to start first year medicine. So what advice would you have for the two of us who are just at the beginning of our medicine journey?
Yeah, okay. So for anyone out there starting medicine, I think the number one thing I'd recommend is that you need to try to stay organized. I want you to organize your week, not only in terms of how much work and what work you're going to do, but in addition, I want you to organize your week in terms of what kind of self-care you're going to do, what is important to you to unwind. It has to be something that I think most people need something that's for themselves, their own time, as well as with other friends and family. And I think the other thing I really want to impress upon you is that it's the kind of it's the consistency of work that's important. And so to do that and to keep motivated throughout your journey, you really need to continually come back to why you wanted to do this in the first place. A lot of people get a bit disillusioned, during their med school or even during early doctor years, because they kind of lose track of that. And so I want you to sort of to remember that. And the final thing I want to sort of impress upon you is that the most important thing in life in general, in my view, but in medicine as a career in particular, is your connections that you make with people. It's not how much you know about everything, because you'll know enough by the time you finish med school, and you'll know enough by the time you finish your training program. It's how you relate to others that's really important. Are you someone who the nurses will say, that's the great doc, and that's the one you want to contact for a bit of advice when they're in trouble, or that's the person we're going to help out when you're in trouble. Are you the person who people look at as a mentor when you're an intern? Are the medical students going to say, oh, that was that great doctor who took time to come and educate us and remembered what it was like as a medical student? Never lose track when you progress through your career about how hard it was back at the time, and always remember that you were there once as a junior doctor or a medical student. And also always remember that patient care is not about you and your and your efforts and your intelligence and your hard work. It's about your team. And so you're just part of that team, and that is absolutely critical to continue to remember. And I can't think about any other career where it's more important. And having those relationships with other people is absolutely critical. So, you know, build bridges, always be nice to people, and you know, and be considerate and be compassionate to not only your patients but to your colleagues and anyone that you meet around. And that's a good sort of philosophy I think I try to keep to in life, but also in particular in the people that I work with in the hospital.
I think that's invaluable advice. Definitely. Even just listening to that, I was like, I'm just feeling like I'm absorbing so much. And even though I've been sitting here, not only for this question, but for this entire interview, I still feel like I want to rewatch this recording a few times because I feel like there's been so many pearls of wisdom. I need to absorb it and take it in. But Dr. Raby, thank you so much for coming on to our first episode. Honestly, such an honor to have you here. Everyone wanted you, and we're lucky we made it happen. And yeah, thank you so much. And hopefully this is just the first of many interviews we have together going down the road.
Going Daksh, and to you, to you both, like, well done for starting something like this. I think it'll be really valuable for all the people who listen to it. Good luck for your start of your medical journey, and enjoy it. You know, really enjoy the journey. It's I look back and I'm like, I really think back to those medical student days and the fun that I had, even during those training days that were difficult, but still I really enjoyed. And so enjoyed the journey along the way. Don't always think, it's this much time to get there. Just take each day as it comes, and enjoy it. And congratulations again for getting into medical school, and never take it for granted. Of course, you're one of very few people who will become doctors in Australia, and it's a real privilege to be a doctor. So we'll never take it for granted, but enjoy the journey.
Thank you so much for that advice, and thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Raby, everyone. All right, thanks heaps to Dr. Ray for coming on the show. He has been such an inspiration to me. And Flynn, I don't know if I've told you this, but I actually probably only really took a gap year after having a chat with Dr. Ray about it.
That's insane.
Wow. Because I remember the first time I got my UCAT score in 2020, right? It was a very borderline score. I remember panicking and not knowing who to talk to. Sent him a message, the CEO of MedEntry, or the co-founder. It's like, what?
Yeah, and he replied.
He responded.
Jeez.
He replied. What an absolute legend.
He definitely applies to a lot of people as well. He applied to me this year, so I definitely recommend that if you guys have any questions about MedEntry, or as like Daksh did, if you're in a position where you need some guidance in the medical admissions process, definitely send a message to him. 100%.
100%. Him and his entire organization, everyone's been so nice throughout the entire process. I remember when it came to the stage where I got no interviews, I messaged him and I asked about a gap year and what that would entail and how difficult it's been and what he thinks. And I remember his advice to me was I know you can do this. Just make sure you don't waste the year. Make sure you do something useful. Make sure you study hard, reflect on what you've done, what went well, what didn't go well, and try and improve for the future. And while that sounds very cliche now, I think at the time that's exactly what you need to hear because, everyone's kind of doing their own thing. All your peers are going to be applying to their own universities and stuff. And oftentimes, even family, as well-intentioned as they are, they may not actually know the ins and outs of the process. Having him there definitely helped me out at that point.
100%. I found that as well. I wish I had someone like that when I was going on my gap year. I just had to talk to my family, which was also really good. But having someone who's been through it all and not just been through medical school, but also specialized and made a whole prep company, to be able to turn to someone like that would be very helpful. And something else, if you guys want to know, is if you guys want to reach out and maybe get some resources from MedEntry. And personally, I found them that they were helpful for my interviews and also for my UCAT. Did you find them? Did you buy any of them?
100%. I agree on both those points. 100%.
Yeah, if you guys want to go out to them, just go medentry.com. It should be able to, just a cheeky Google search, and you should be able to find them. Definitely, I would definitely recommend for the interviews doing the mock interviews. Personally, I did 3 mock interviews. I think that may have been a bit overkill, but if you guys definitely want to do at least 1 mock interview, I found that was very helpful for myself. But we'll definitely go into in another episode of more of the interviews. In terms of the UCAT, definitely. What was your thoughts on like the UCAT package at MedEntry?
I just want to quickly say this isn't a paid plug, but we both enjoyed the product so much, and we genuinely think it'd bring a lot of value.
True.
The UCAT products were amazing. I think, personally speaking, I did every single one of their mocks,
Wow.
and I thought the level of analysis that you could do on their LMS in terms of tracking progress and seeing the percentiles and seeing the scoring systems and everything, I thought that was invaluable because it's such an easy way to track yourself, track your improvement, and also compare yourself against the best. Because really only the best are going to be, paying for a prep program and doing all these mocks, and comparing yourself to them is a really good kind of benchmark to be able to better yourself for the future.
No, I agree 100%. With the UK, I only did, I think, a couple mocks with MedEntry, and overall those mocks were really good. I definitely believe that they were very similar to the actual UCAT. However, I do believe that the MedEntry ones were a tiny bit harder, but that's the way that MedEntry likes to prepare their students. They want to put themselves in environments where they're definitely tested, so when they come across an easier section or easier exam, they can absolutely destroy it. And you can see for Daksh doing all the mocks and then coming out with a 99 percentile or 98 percentile. That's insane. But definitely MedEntry, if you guys want to get some resources from, definitely look into it. Really good resources.
Yeah, free diagnostic mock as well, so you can try it before you buy. Pretty much.
Exactly. True.
And if you set that diagnostic mock, it's free. You'll see what we mean. Make sure you get it. Tell them we sent you. Hopefully, maybe we can get a sponsorship soon. Who knows?
That's it.
Who knows?
All good.
Maybe this will be a paid plug soon.
It could be.
All right. Okay. So let's look at what we are doing now.
Sure.
So obviously we're both moving to uni relatively soon. We're both moving cities. So tell me a little bit about the logistics behind that. What's been going on with you with that?
Cool. So when I got my offer, the first thing that I did was apply to accommodation. I definitely recommend that you listeners apply to accommodation early, because I actually haven't received an offer for accommodation yet, which means that I may have to put up a tent outside the medical facility. But that's definitely something I'm willing to do. No, I'm joking, Monash. Please don't hear this.
Please, Monash.
No, but that's my plan now, getting accommodation sorted. And then I'll be heading down there in the next couple of weeks, which is definitely exciting because I've never actually been to Melbourne. I don't know anyone in Melbourne. So there's definitely going to be a lot of hurdles, and I definitely want to talk about it on these podcasts because I think that's a definitely important thing to explore, not just the pathway of getting into medicine, but also the social life and stuff that's also very important to getting in and also excelling after that point. So definitely those are my steps going forward, getting that accommodation and trying to enjoy the Monash experience 100%. What about you?
Are you going to be attending Monash O Week?
Oh yeah. They have their own medicine O Week, which should be sick. Should be a lot of beers, a lot of alcohol, which is you gotta experience the damaging of the liver to really be a patient. You know what I mean? So I'm joking. Completely.
To be able to have a good understanding of how to treat patients,
it's all
you
about
need to have
empathy.
an understanding of
It's all about empathy around here.
Empathy.
No, I'm joking.
100% empathy.
We're gonna get cancelled. Oh no.
We're getting cancelled episode 1. Oh no.
Imagine. All right, but yeah, that's my plans. What about you, Daksh? What are your plans?
Yeah. So look, similar to you, I'm having accommodation issues at the moment. But unlike you, I applied super early. Wow. I applied for accommodation way back in November, right? And this is before I even sat my interview, so I had no clue whether I was even going to get in. And I applied way back in November, and I'm still on the waiting list. And this is January 29th that we're recording this right now, and still on the waiting list as of now. So still trying to sort something out. It's really unfortunate. If someone from Newcastle, on campus accommodations is listening, please bump me up.
Love that.
Please. Please. But other than that, I'm looking to also leave a couple days early before O Week, scope out the area, have an understanding of what's going on. And I'm lucky in the sense that I do know a couple people who are going to Newcastle.
That's good.
So, we've been chatting a bit. And
Good mates.
yeah, hopefully it should be a good experience. Have you enrolled in your courses and stuff yet?
I've enrolled.
Yeah.
I haven't done all my I have to get vaccinations, I think, and also get a working with children check, but I think I can do that later down the track. What are your plans for like your first year? Like, are you gonna focus heavily on the study, have that balance between study and chill, or just straight out chill, peas get degrees? You know what I mean?
See, it's so difficult, man. I don't know.
Facts.
I definitely need to gauge how I find the content, and the difficulty of like, you know, how much content there is and how quickly I'm able to learn it and like use it. I think a lot depends on that. If I'm extremely slow at picking up content, it'll be unfortunate because I will be studying a fair amount.
That's right.
But no, I'm definitely looking to join a bunch of relevant clubs and societies. Having a look, Newcastle has a fair few ones that I'm quite interested at the moment. And yeah, hopefully not only like just doing med studies, but still continuing to focus on my fitness as I have been in this gap year, and participating in all these clubs and stuff, which I think is really like a good thing with unis. They have all of these societies and clubs and events going on. It's fun.
Yeah, exactly. That's also my focus going to be this year, especially Monash first year being pass and fail, which means that all assignments and exams are like hurdles, which is good because it means that I have time to focus, as you said, on important things outside of academics, which is like your fitness, your social life, the beers at the club, you know, the real important things. But
the real important things in life.
Exactly, that's it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but those are my plans for this year. But yeah, I think that's our plans for the upcoming years of medical school.
100%, mate. This has been so much fun to record.
100%.
Again, as we said at the beginning, this has been something that's been on our mind for a while. Both of us having been on a gap year, we had way too much time at certain parts of the year to really delve deeply into the ins and outs of how to get into med school and like which med schools need which scores. And at this point, it's like we know way too much like information that's irrelevant to day-to-day life.
So true.
So why not, you know, put it on a podcast and get it to people who it may be quite relevant for.
That's so true. Yeah, thanks for that, Daksh. And really, just to re-emphasize with MedEntry, if you guys are looking forward to get some MedEntry resources like UCAT, just go on medentry.com and you'll be able to do that diagnostic test, and then after that maybe make a decision to do some interview. And obviously this isn't a paid sponsor, and MedEntry, if you're listening out there,
hopefully soon.
Hopefully soon. All good. All right, thanks Daksh for that. Have a good one.
Awesome. Too easy. See ya.
Cheers.
Bye.